Okay, ready? Welcome, Drink with James, episode 33. As you might have noticed, we are not in the Napa Valley. We are in a conference room in Soho right now. Here's the deal. We had to cancel the trip and reschedule it for March. Yes, there was torrential downpour and that certainly played into it, but I think a bigger factor was that the croquet field was being renovated. And I'm not gonna go to the Meadowood if the croquet field is not open. It is one of the finest croquet fields in the country, and I was not gonna miss my chance to play on that with a local pro. So Tim and I are gonna be back in March. We're gonna hit up the croquet fields. I need to get a white sweater. Tim probably does as well, so this gives us time to do that. The other thing you might notice is, yeah, I'm wearing a spring blazer today, but it's the middle of winter. But it's 60 degrees in New York City, and I dress for the weather that I'm given, not the month of the year. So, on to the questions. Little different question, coming from a photographer. You know, we usually talk about being more traditionally a fashion influencer, fashion blogger, but it's tough as a photographer out there, right? It's tough to stand out on social. And I think the level of photography and the quality level of photography on social media now versus when I was kind of on the up and up and I was growing a following is vastly different. Meaning people are so much better now. I think one, people are so much better and the opportunities are potentially more interesting, right? You look at those, you know, a lot of the Instagram photography accounts are travel based, right? These people basically don't have homes. They're constantly traveling, they're big adventure people, they're backpacking, they're fucking surfing in the Arctic under the northern lights. Like, how are you gonna compete with a guy who's night surfing under the northern lights in the middle of the Arctic Circle? Like, that is hard to compete with if you're doing that kind of thing. So I think that's why it's more important to look at the situation that you're in and think about how can I make this my own and make it special and make it me. I was sitting down for lunch with a woman the other day, and she was an influencer and not a photographer, but she lived in London. And I was looking through her feed and I was like, I honestly had no idea you lived in London, and that should not be the case. This feed should just scream London because that's something that's like different and really interesting about you and your scenario. So wherever you might be, if you're in New York City and that's all you get to capture, like that's not so bad, but try and do it in your own way. Don't just be shooting the same photos that everyone else is, because especially when you're starting out, you're not going to be able to shoot the photos that the really popular people are taking as well as they're doing probably. So you really need to kind of come up with your own vibe. And this is the same advice that we give to fashion influencers, right? Like, you need to have your own style, you need to have your own angle. It's no different as a photographer. You need to be an interesting person. You can let them into your life a little bit, talk about being a photographer, talk about struggling, talk about trying to make it, but don't just do what everyone else is doing. And also, like, ease up on the test shoots. I feel like most, especially male photographers, get a little bit of a following and then they start hitting up modeling agencies and asking to do test shoots. And then their feed just becomes photos of random models. And I think it's so boring, and I think it doesn't help you grow as a photographer. I think shooting models is really easy because you have a really, beautiful man or woman whose whole job it is to look good in photos, and you're just pointing a camera at them. Like, that is not hard, and I don't think it teaches you anything, and it isn't interesting. It really isn't. Like, getting to hang out with beautiful people might be cool, but those photos are pretty boring. So if you're trying to be a fashion photographer, I would implore you to stay away from test shoots because I don't think they're helpful or interesting. Instagram is certainly super important right now, but I've had photographers that I find are really interesting do a lot of different things. There's a guy, Emiliano, I'll throw his feed up here, and I love his photos, they're great, but he also prints a pack of postcards every year, and he just sends postcards out to people. He's done a newspaper in the past, and I really loved that. So you can do different things to stand out, and certainly printing your photos or doing something interesting with them off of, Instagram can help separate you and help people see your photos in a new way. And if you're not gaining traction on Instagram and you're just posting to there, then, I don't know if that's a good use of your time as a photographer. I think there's other things you could be doing. First of all, thank you. The suit is fantastic. I appreciate that. So yeah, we all feel the pressure to create beautiful editorial content. But what if something else is resonating with your audience? I think you can't ignore what people are responding to, right? You got to give the people what they want in some way, and also do what you want. If you really love doing editorial professional shoots, and that's your passion, but your mirror selfies are doing better, I think you can do both. I don't think every single photo needs to be optimized for engagement and for your audience. Here's the thing, your audience, I think we've talked about this before, but your audience is there, right? Certainly they could unfollow you, but they're already there. So just pandering to your existing audience isn't really a super smart strategy, I think. I think it's important to say, what are people reacting to? And yeah, hopefully that you can extrapolate that out to a wider audience and hopefully attract more people. But you can't just pander to your audience. I mean, a great example is I used to work with a big athletic company as a photographer. And the photos that did best for them were just a profile shot of a shoe, right? But they can't have their entire feed be a profile shot of a shoe. That would be incredibly boring. So even though those were the photos that did best, they had to kind of, use those every once in a while because otherwise the account as a whole loses interest. So if a mirror selfie does best, then maybe make sure you do one of those a week, but don't always do it because then it just becomes, a feed of mirror selfies. And again, if that's what you like to do and that's the whole vibe of your feed, then I say go fucking crazy, awesome, good for you. You don't need a photographer. It's gonna be pretty easy. But if what you enjoy doing is something else and you like to take travel photos and you like to talk about coffee and you like to do all these other things, but the mirror selfies do well, just make sure you use those and maybe pick a day or 2 days a week where you always do that. Or if you post 3 photos a day, make sure the one that you post at 6 p.m. every day is that mirror selfie. Whatever it is, just be consistent. We always talk about that. Be consistent and don't just do it randomly, and continue to do what you like as well. So blog name versus name. When I started my blog 9 years ago, I called it Highlighted Life. So, long story short, I actually wanted to create a website wherein a person would come in every day and write down what the highlight of their day was, right? And so then at the end of the year, you would have 365 of the best things that happened to you. It would be your life, but only the highlights. And so that's kind of where the name came. It was, for me, it was oh, I'm going to kind of do this for myself. I'm going to post these things that I really love, or just the kind of highlights of my life. Now, as I moved away from that, it didn't really make sense. It didn't make sense as a blog name. And when people would be like, "What's your blog?" I would always just be like, "Oh, it's jamesnoor.com." So I think if the blog name is something that is going to drive your content for the long term, then I think it could make sense to have a blog name. Lust for Life from Olivia Lopez, right? She's great, and she has this exuberance and passion for life that is evident in every single photo she takes, no matter what. So the fact that she has a lust for life, that makes sense for her, right? It also helps, you can kind of play on the name. She'll say she does these photos of plants, and she says lust for, hashtags it lust for leaves. I think sometimes when she travels, she'll do lust for Japan or something. So, a blog name does give you an opportunity to expand the brand a little bit beyond just yourself, which is helpful. Now, I think if you're a photographer, definitely makes sense just to use your name. And the other thing is if you have a really memorable, good name, like James Nord, let's say, Tim Jeffries, that's a good name. If you have a name that is memorable, it's easy to pronounce, it's no more than 3 syllables, I think you could use your name as well, and I think that can certainly work. It just depends on kind of what the vibe is going to be. But if you have an idea that is going to drive your content, you can definitely name it. But don't just come up with a name that is arbitrary and has nothing to do with what your content is. Blank and blank, for instance. Like beef jerky and sparkles. What that doesn't fucking mean anything. And nobody really cares. And you don't want to confuse people and be like, wait, why is it named that? So if you can't think of something really good that is going to drive your content, then I would just stick with your name. So that's it.